Hello. Today I would like to show you how to design your very own first ship in the Ship Designer. This is the second episode in my tutorial series on how to use the Ship Designer. I do recommend you go and check out the first episode if you haven't seen it yet. Without further ado, let's go. The ship that I'm going to be designing is a small mining ship that is going to be intended for new players. This means that in my case, I'm going to start by placing the crates of the ship as they're going to be representing the core. Had I started designing a fighting ship, I would have probably started by the weaponry. Placing these elements is always the first thing that I do whenever I design a ship, because it's going to be what is going to determine the dimensions, the amount of power, the amount of thrusters I'm going to need. So I always start by the core components, and only then do I start going on to other elements of the ship. This is why you see me moving those crates all around. I'm trying to decide what is the amount of crates I want and what is the shape I want to give to my ship. Now that I have decided that I wanted 64 crates and I wanted them placed this way, I can now start to beam the ship. Now, here's the first very important hint I'm going to be giving you in this video. Do not, truly, do not auto-bolt crates. This is a bad idea. The reason why it's a bad idea is twofold. The first problem is that it's going to be consuming a lot of your bolts. The second problem is this is very durability error prone. This means that whenever you're going to start accumulating resources in your cargo ship, in your mining ship, or in your pirate ship, the crates are going to be pushing against one another. This is going to reduce the durability, and in the worst case scenario, they may even go under 1 of durability, in which case they will detach. Now, since I'm not auto-bolting these crates, I do not want to spend too much time bolting them by hand. So what you see me do right now is a small section containing 8 crates that I'm going to be bolting very generously, which is then going to allow me to copy paste it as many times as needed, and thus have a good durability with my ship and do not have any troubles with auto-bolting. And here I figured out I could actually be even lazier and do a 4 crate module that will then copy paste to make an 8 crate module and then copy paste that. It's all about efficiency. The less time you spend doing the exact same time, the more enjoyable the ship design experience is going to be. Now that I've got a very satisfying 8 crate module, I can now copy paste it again and again until I get back to 64 crates. Except that this time they are all very well bolted. Before I go any further with my ship design, I'm actually going to show you what really happens when you auto-bolt your crates, just to prove my point as to how bad of an idea it really is. As you can see, the ship strength is currently at 3.605 exactly, and even by adding the maximum weight per crate of 40,000 tons, that ship strength does not move at all. What I'm going to be doing right now is that I'm going to be removing all of the crates and just the crates and re-putting them back into the ship. The reason why I'm doing that is because I want to remove all of the bolts that are currently attached to the crates. I'm then going to auto-bolt the crates. In this case, I honestly wasn't even expecting to have durability errors immediately, but as you can see, those crates are empty. They already have durability errors. So I'm going to try and bolt them, and then I'm going to show you what happens when you start increasing the weight that each one of these crates needs to carry. Now that I'm back at reasonable values for the ship strength factor, I'm going to try and increase the mass. And as you can see, each time I increase this mass, I get more and more and more durability errors. 15,000 tons, 20,000 tons, and 27,000 tons are elements in the game that you can carry. Like, these are ores. The previous setup with no autobolt could carry up to 40,000 tons per crate with no durability error. This shows just how important it is to not auto-bolt these crates. Now that I'm done telling about the crates, I can now move on to the power generation and other ship components. I have already decided that my ship was going to be having one laser and one collector. In order to explain what I'm going to be doing, I'm just going to show you very quickly how the electricity works in Starbase for the ships. I'll be keeping it simple in this video. I'll be doing another one where I'll be going much more into detail as to how the electricity in Starbase works. So the simple concept is that you've got rods. Rods contain raw fuel. The rods are placed into the fuel chamber. The fuel chamber will process the raw fuel into refined fuel. Refined fuel is what gets used by the generators. You can have up to 3 generators for one fuel chamber. As seen here, there's a first problem, and that is that the generators and fuel chambers will both be generating heat. We need to deal with that heat, or the fuel chambers and generators will shut off. So the first part of that solution is the heatsink. The heatsink is going to soak up all of the heat that is generated by the generators, but it cannot dissipate it efficiently on its own. So now we have a situation where the generators and the fuel chambers are not overheating yet because they're giving all of the heat to the heatsinks, but the heatsinks are accumulating it without being able to dissipate it. So the last piece of this puzzle is the radiator. The radiator is very efficiently going to be taking all of the heat from the heatsink, and he is going to be able to dissipate it efficiently. But unlike the heatsinks, which can be directly plugged to your generator, radiators are external. So thus, we need a new part, the sockets. Sockets get plugged directly to both your generators or your fuel chambers, it doesn't matter. The orange ones are going to be taking the orange cable. This is what's going to dissipate your heat. The red ones will be taking the blue cables to data and electricity. Your radiators need to be put on a hardpoint. That hardpoint needs to be connected with the pipes to your generators. For this example, using the blue cables is not needed. It is, however, going to be for your builds. As you can see, the heat is no longer being stored in the heatsinks, nor is it in the fuel chambers and in the generators. That is because the heat is properly being given to the radiators that then dissipate it completely, thus making a system that works. There are quite a few things that I'm not showing in this video to keep it as simple as possible. Namely, I'm not showing you enhancers and cooling cells. Those will be shown in a later video. Since this was quite a lot of information, here's a little schematic to make things easier. The fuel rod contains raw fuel and is put into the fuel chamber. The fuel chamber will process the raw fuel into processed fuel that it will then give to the generators. Each fuel chamber can have up to 3 generators. The generators are the ones generating the electricity. That electricity is given to the rest of the ship through the generator circuit board, which can be placed anywhere on the generators or the fuel chamber. The fuel chamber and generators are going to generate heat, which needs to be given to a heatsink. In order to dissipate that heat, it needs to be given to a radiator. That is done through the pipe socket board. Both of them are connected through pipes. Now that you know how the electricity works for ships, you can now understand what I'm about to do for the ship design. In order to not have any excessive amount of generators or not have enough generators for the matter, I need to know what are the electric consumption of the components that I'm going to be putting into my ship and how many generators do I need to keep those components on. The easiest way to get all of those values is to head towards the Wikipedia. Here you can see that the collector will consume anywhere from between 0 to 6,000 worth of electricity per second. In my case, I'll set it up so that it only consumes 2,000, and the laser, which consumes 6,000 electricity per second. So that's for my electric consumption. The Wikipedia shows me that the tier 1 generators that I'll be using produce exactly 1,000 of electricity per second. I could go with 8 generators, but the problem with doing so is that I'd have no more power to move my ship. I want to use the laser, the collector, and I still want to move my ship. So in order to do that, I'm going to be giving myself an excess of power. I'll speed up this part because I'm just trying different configurations. I'll add that the reason for which you see me move everything around is because the more neighbors your generators and fuel chambers are to each other, the more heat is going to be generated. So I've got an incentive to make everything as big as possible, but I don't want it to be too big, otherwise it's going to be impractical for my ship. I do recommend you check the Wikipedia on the heat generation. It's going to give you very precious information. As a side note, unlike crates, you can auto-bolt your fuel chambers and generators. It's going to consume a lot of bolts, maybe a bit more than necessary, but it's going to keep your durability up. Now that I'm pretty much decided on the shape I want to give to my generators, I can now start implementing propellant. The propellant is what's going to be needed with the electricity in order to get the thrusters to fire and the ship to move. As you can see, I'm still moving all of these components around, and this is because I want to make sure that all of the different components of the ship are as easy to access and to maintain as possible. Should you ever run out of propellant or out of rods, they're easy to access and you can easily change them. I'm also still trying to figure out what can I fit where. The white boxes you see here are the batteries. They are important because the amount of electricity that can be produced by a generator is not going to go from 0 to 1000 instantly. It needs time to ramp up. Batteries are here to buffer that amount of time, so that your ship can still run while it needs more electricity. I'll be working more on the generator and propellant part later, but for now I need to start working on the thrusters to make sure that everything works as intended. Just like with electricity, there is a lot of things that you need to do correctly in order to get the thrusters to work properly. Here are the basics. Just with like the generators, I'll show you a very simplified example to explain what's going on with the thrusters. The ship you see right here is called the Zoom Zoom. It's a pocket ship, a very simple ship that pretty much serves to go from station to station. Conveniently, it only has thrusters and a seat. So the first part you need is the levers. These levers that you see under the seat are the ones that are moving the ship, but they aren't controlling the thrusters directly, even though you can see I am moving them. When seated, these levers are the ones that are being used. They, however, need to be within 2 meters of the seat, otherwise it won't work. Those levers send their information to that red little box. This is called the controller. The controller is reading all of the values of all of the levers, such as the FC rotational yaw that you've just seen me use right now. The controller isn't the one that's moving all of your different thrusters. That is the work of the flight computer, which is the blue box. The flight computer will manage up to 50 different groups of thrusters. Technically, you could in fact have a lever that would directly control a thruster such as you see here. The reason, however, for which I discourage doing so is because it would be unbelievably difficult to fly straight. The reason for which it would be so difficult is because the flight computer is doing many corrections, as you can see here. The reason why these corrections are being done is because the center of mass is not perfectly aligned with the center of thrust. It's extremely difficult to do. Thus, the computer is always compensating for you to get the ship to fly straight. Same as with the electric generation, here is a very simplified version of what's going on. It all starts with you as a player using your keyboard. If your endo is sitting on a pilot chair, those keyboard inputs then get sent to any levers that are within proximity. Those lever values then get sent to the flight controller. The flight controller determines what are the directions of your ship, such as front, back, up, down, left and right. The controller sends its own values to the flight computer. The flight computer is the one that gives the different thrust values to the thrusters. In order to be able to be useful, those thrusters are also going to be needing adequate levels of energy and propellant. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes, but with this you should understand what I'm about to be doing on the other ship. I'll be fast forwarding this part too. While designing the thruster part, I've got quite a few things in mind. First is I want the price of the ship to remain as low as possible. Second is that I do not want the ship to be too slow, so I have to compromise somewhere here. And third, I would like all of the components to be as easy to access as possible. Should anything go wrong, asteroid being hit or anything similar, I would like the player to have as little difficulties as possible to fix everything that needs fixing. An important thing that is not very obvious at first is that the hard points that are on the thrusters not only need to be bolted to the thrusters themselves, but they absolutely must be bolted to beams too. Should this condition not be fulfilled, those thrusters will not be able to work. So it's a bit of a trap, but please make sure that whenever you bolt those hard points on your thrusters, you also do bolt them to the beams. Whenever giving the possibility, especially on long distances, always use ducts rather than cables and pipes. The reason is because for the same length, ducts will be cheaper on your cables, pipes and ducts budget than will cables and pipes. Starbase defines a ship as a combination of beams, hard points and thrusters, all of which need to be bolted together. Until your ship is recognized as being a ship by the ship designer, you cannot display the durability of your ship. Now that I've fulfilled the conditions, I can now start increasing the durability of my ship more easily, because I'll know what are the weak points of the ship that are going to be requiring more support and or more bolts. Lowest point of durability on the ship is going to be indicated by those yellow squares. No matter how high the durability of your ship, you will always have these squares. This is because they indicate which component of your ship has the lowest. If the lowest component of your ship has a durability of 1, it's going to display 1. If it's 10,000, it's going to be on the 10,000. So don't attempt to erase them all, they're just going to move. This, however, allows you to know which parts are the ones that require the most attention. On a side note, whenever the durability drops under 1, it's going to be displayed as red. This is because whenever you start speeding up, those parts are at risk of detaching from your ship, which is less than ideal. Since one of my main concerns with this ship is its price, and in order to keep it low, I'll be using the maneuver thrusters in order to allow the ship to rotate freely. At this point, I pretty much decided that the amount of propellant I had on the ship was not going to be enough. It doesn't need to have a great range, but it can't afford to have a tiny one. So I'm moving around this propellant. I'm still trying to find out the best possible combination I can have with them. The main concern here is that I cannot easily auto-bolt them to the generators. They need to have their own beams. Another concern about something that I'm going to have to deal with is the emplacement of the laser and the collector. They need to be nice and easy to use. Here, I settled on the idea that I was going to have a total of 6 small propellant tanks that were going to be set as close as possible to the generators. An important note here is that the propellants do not need to have both supports, just one is enough. The supports are obviously going to be holding the propellant tanks, and they're also going to allow for the data, electricity and network to flow through, but they don't need both. If you generously bolt, it's good enough. I'll accelerate this part even more as I was simply trying to figure out and correct some durability errors. Here, I'm setting up the pipes and the cables for the maneuver thrusters. Same as with all of the rest of the ship. I want everything to be as easy to access as possible and as easy as possible to fix. I'm cabling all of the parts of the ship in preparation for the first tests, which are going to require the first prototype of the cockpit. A very important tip is that the crate can be used to transport heat, electricity, data, ammo, propellant, anything. The crates can be used as an extension to your cables, pipes and ducts, but without costing you anything. Since this is just more cabling, I'll accelerate this part too. An important element my ship does not possess yet are reverse thrusters. Here I'm using triangle thrusters rather than maneuver thrusters in order to increase the braking speed of my ship and also prevent the impression that you are flying a brick. I'm also preparing a dedicated slot on which the players are going to be able to put their crafting tables. This is because this way I can ensure that the players that want to put a crafting table on their ship are going to be putting it aligned with the center of thrust and center of gravity of the ship. This is going to make sure that there is no loss in efficiency should the crafting table be added. And I'm just adding a few decals just to make it as obvious as possible that this is what those beams are intended for. Now that the ship is ready to be tested, I need to start working on my cockpit. Since when leaving a cockpit, the endo of the player tends to go on the side, I'm placing beams in order to make sure that you land on something and not in the void of space. This means that if ever you leave your seat while the ship is moving, you don't get left behind, which is kind of an important feature. It is now time to place the controller. Important is that the arrows on the top of the controller represent what your ship is going to understand as being the front and the top of your ship. If you flip that controller on its side, your ship is going to attempt to fly in really strange directions when you want to go forward. So please be very mindful of those arrows when you place that controller. I also placed the speedometer, the flight computer and the transponder, and now I'm working on the dashboard in order to place all of the buttons and all of the values with which the player is going to be interacting in order to control the ship. Making a decent cockpit is an entire video on its own. That is just how important it is. In my case, I just want to keep it simple and I just want the player to have all of the needed information being displayed right in front of him to control the ship. Here I'm writing a very simple YOLO script that you're going to be finding on most of my ships to control the power. I won't be going into YOLO in this video. This is a subject for a separate video. For now, just know that this is how I'm making sure that the generators are automatically adjusting the power output according to the level of your batteries. This makes sure that they do not run for nothing, such as what happens usually on the Labora when you leave it on. What you see me do right now is a bumper, and it's exploiting the characteristics of collision damage in Starbase. Collisions propagate up to 24 objects, so I'm placing more than 24 objects with beams in order to protect the ship. This is not going to work at great speeds, and it's really just to protect the cockpit, not the rest of the ship. It's because should the player ever bump into an asteroid at great speeds outside of the safe zone, I must really make sure that that cockpit is as safe as possible. Otherwise, there's no means to control the ship anymore. Usually my ships have got way more than one laser and collector, so placing them isn't really a big deal, but since I've only got one of each, I'm really battling to see how I can place them in a way that actually is going to be useful to the player. So right here I'm doing my first power tests, and I'm realizing that the generators are battling to ramp up fast enough to compensate for the lasers. So I'm just changing my YOLO and adding a button in order to allow the ship to be up to the task. This sets a minimum value for the generators, but it also means that the rods get burned much faster. I also need to add resource bridges in order to allow the player to access the crates that are within the ship, but also to refuel at a station if needed. To work, the resource bridges need to be connected both with pipes and cables to the rest of the ship. Here I've started to place the levers, haven't configured them yet, but I'm also adding a yellow that's going to be interacting with the levers, and that's going to prevent the ship from keep going forward whenever you want to reverse. This is important because it actually avoids quite a few accidents. In order to name your levers properly, these simply use the values that are in the controller. I'm doing my first tests with the ship and I'm realizing that I'm not satisfied with the acceleration of the ship, so I need to add a few more thrusters at the back in order to get that speed up. I still need to be mindful of the price of the ship, but I really do need more thrust. Yeah, I'm just working out how I can make those triangle thruster modules as durable as possible. You only need to connect a hard point with pipes, cables and bolts to one of the thruster triangles that are grouped stuck together. This is because the side of the thruster triangles are going to connect with one another and require the same thrust output. Thus, you cannot have one big triangle wall at the back of your ship and give it different names and expect that to work. It will not, and it will cause you trouble. If you want to achieve something similar, just insert small gaps in between your triangles. Here, what just happened is that the thrusters were not named properly, so one of the reverse thrusters was not turning on correctly. And this is because it had one of the same names as the thrusters on the back, and both of them were being fired at the same time. In this case, I used the auto thrusting naming tool in order to fix the problem, which is why you need to be very careful about the thruster names. Right now, I'm already very satisfied with the ship in general, and I'm just tinkering with the last details. I'm polishing it. I want it to be as nice as possible to use, but it's almost completed. Just as I was finishing the ship, I actually had to do a last test where I increased the weight of the crates, and I realized that once the ship was finished, I was getting durability errors on my beams. So I very simply fixed that, and the ship is officially done. It will be available for free on my Discord. I'll give you the link. Guys, thanks a lot for watching my video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you and bye bye.